It is hard to believe it has been over 3 years since I've had you on the show, but we have the man, the myth, the legend himself back in the house. It is Survivorman, Les Stroud. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's good to be here.
I am glad to have you. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about this new documentary, this new project that you're working on, the Question of Bigfoot. That is a huge question. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why the project? Why now, Les? Why are you getting into this deep waters of the Question of Bigfoot?
Okay, to answer your why question, good question. It's a matter, as so many things are in life, I'm always paying attention to the existentiality of life, everything that's going on around me and the timing and so on. I've been requested to jump back into the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch realm for a long time. I've resisted it because I've been busy with other things. I have my series Wild Harvest, which is just kicking ass on PBS in the United States, doing so well. Just love making that series. And of course, my music, I've been working away on my music. The why is a bit because I almost would want to answer that in the most honest way I can and say, did I really get to the bottom of things with the original series, Survivorman, Bigfoot? I would say quite quickly and candidly, no, I don't believe I did. A lot has come to light since that time. That was 10 years ago that I did that series, 10. So a lot has come to light in that time. A lot of things have come and gone in the world of Sasquatch and the world of Bigfoot research. As well, I'm not in the position that I once was at the top of my game as Survivorman when finances were fluid and loose and easy. Hey, I want to produce this? Yeah, throw some money at it. Let's produce it. Not in that situation, but what did come along was the success of Kickstarter and being able to create a campaign and say, look, if we can get enough juice, as it were, behind the wheels, we can make this thing run. So I thought, okay, you know what? Timing is right. Timing is right for me to get back on this whole new perspective of how we can approach the phenomenon of Bigfoot. And at the same time, I can incorporate using Kickstarter. So I'll just get that plug out of the way right now for everybody listening. Kickstarter.com, if you go and if you just put in the Question of Bigfoot, find that campaign. It was fun building all the reward possibilities from $20 to really big ticket items where I will take you out on an actual expedition or we go out for dinner. That being available also created the space for me to say, you know what? Let's do this. I've teamed back up with the editor that I worked with for many years on all of my Survivorman and Survivorman Bigfoot, Barry Farrell. So I thought this is the right time. If I was ever to do Bigfoot again, it really needs to be Barry because he worked on all the original series. So yeah, everything's fallen into place.
There's the why. Let's talk about this question because that is something that comes up for all of us that have been into this. A lot has changed in 3 years since you were on. We had a great conversation the first time you were on the show, and I had not had any experiences at that point that led me to believe these creatures were 100% real. That has changed for me over the last couple of months. I can't really talk about it. Obviously, people know about it on the show. I'm under NDA because I was involved in filming a project that will hopefully be out before the end of the year. And then I can talk about these experiences, but I am now in the knower camp. I know you've been sitting there for quite a while. So let's talk a little bit about some of the questions that have been out there that are surrounding this project and Bigfoot in and of itself. What are some of those main questions that you're looking to answer with this new project? Then we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts about how you're going to approach and get into those answers to those questions that we've all been seeking.
The specific questions are all of them because there's such a breadth of questions and there's so many, more like a gradient, right? You have a gradient of understanding about this phenomenon of what it is or what it might be. So let's start over here and start the arrow going and say, okay, it's Gigantopithecus and it's a holdover relic hominid. And then the arrow starts to go, I think, largely driven by recorded attributes of what it can do or can't do. Everything from the basics of it can pick berries and hunt elk and it defecates and lives in cave. Those are the basics all the way. And then you look over here and it's a full-blown alien. And it travels through portals. But that scope, that's a large thing. So it's all these gradients of what individuals believe it or understand it or surmise it might be. Within each of those gradients, you have questions. Okay, yeah. Okay, it's a big old, very smart ape. Okay. How is it not being seen on cameras? How's it even going to survive? So you see, that's just starting there. You get over here, it's like, all right, what kind of experiences do people have that indicate that it has telepathic abilities or portal travel abilities? And what is that? And where are we going with that? Are we bringing in Neil deGrasse Tyson to talk about portal travel? Where are we going with this? Again, you get questions within that. Okay, if we're over here, what's the difference between believing in Bigfoot and believing in ghosts or God? And I love all of these questions with as little hubris as I require. I'd like to try to answer them all in succinct detail. Because what we tend to do, I shouldn't say we, because I'm not actually, as I've said many times, I'm not a Bigfoot researcher. I'm a documentary filmmaker, keenly interested in the subject matter, and I've had my own experiences. Okay, that said, I'd like to see how succinctly we can answer these questions. What happens is everybody has their question or their answer, but they're not answering the other 82% of the questions. They're just stuck here in this gradient, or they're stuck here, or they're stuck here. I want to take it all on.
I love that. People are definitely excited to have you back into the ring, so to speak, going toe to toe with this question, because you bring so much validity to the subject. You bring so much from your Survivorman experiences. It's a different caliber of having somebody take a look at this. It's almost the same thing that we go through with trying to get academics into the subject, looking at people like Meldrum and the people that are interested in this with PhD behind their name. You do that in a different way because for us, the boots on the ground researchers and the people who get out trying to have our own experiences are looking for some validity, because there is so much ridicule that goes on in the community and so much ridicule that goes on just people in general towards us that are interested in the subject. So I am excited to have you look at all aspects. And that I put it out there to the listenership of the show a couple of days ago. I went on Reddit and did a couple of posts that we were going to do this interview, and I got tons of questions. I probably got 150 questions from people. We've definitely narrowed those down. Trust me, I'm not going to ask you 150 questions. I'm going to be respectful of your time. But one of the main questions that came out of this was, are you going to actually get into your experiences with Sasquatch in this new film? Are you going to talk about the possibility that they're interdimensional, supernatural, the spiritual aspect of Sasquatch? That frankly, the person who asked this question wants to get more into that because they believe that there's something to be explored there. And are you going to look at some of those aspects of this creature, not just the flesh and blood aspect, but some of the more weird things, the high strangeness events that people experience? Are you going to draw from your own experiences in this new project?
Emphatic yeses to both of those questions. Let's go to the drawing from my own experiences. Clearly, across the 10 episodes of Survivorman, I don't want to be redundant and just rehash what I already did. In fact, I would rather come fully to what I experienced while filming Survivorman Bigfoot, which would include certain things I did not share on Survivorman Bigfoot. Wasn't ready to, wasn't in the right place, wasn't right for the series. Just a tangent for a second. In a like way, when I had my experience in Alaska, I was filming Survivorman, and Survivorman was riding high. I never mentioned that in the Survivorman series because I didn't want to detract from what I was doing as Survivorman. If I say Bigfoot, well, in the middle of a Survivorman show, everybody's going to be all, so it's a shiny object, so I'm not even going to mention it. And while I was doing Survivorman Bigfoot, the same thing, there were certain things that happened. And that does lead us to the other elements of perspective on this. It's a bit of a misnomer, but you can put the paranormal blanket on it, let's say. And the short answer to that is yes. Now, am I going to bother Jeff Meldrum with questions about them traveling through portals? No, because that's not where Jeff comes from. I want to deal with Jeff Meldrum where Jeff Meldrum lives and ask him respectful questions within the scope of that. But if someone over here is saying, look, I communicate with them and they come from this planet, then I'm going to ask some specific questions and get specific answers out of that person. Not in a way so that once I get to this side of the scale, it mocks or disrespects what was over on this side of the scale. Not at all. Every gradient has its place, but every gradient is filled with questions. So that's my long way to answer the question, but the short way was yes and yes.
Speaking of Survivorman in Alaska, that was one of the questions that came from one of our fans over on Reddit. They asked specifically about the incident that happened to you while filming in Alaska. Have you considered going back to that exact area at the exact same time to see if you can have history repeat itself And do you think that's a valid thing, going back and looking at some of these areas that you've been, in addition to going back to Alaska? In general, people are asking, how are you going to approach this new project about the question of Bigfoot?
Let's go to the first question and finish with it, and then come back to this one. Short answer is yes, I am going to be going back to some places. My longer answer to that is I'm not sure exactly where, when, or how yet. So many places that I went, so many experiences. The experience in Smoky Mountains, Tennessee was far more profound than I ever explained. I didn't share it. The experience I had with Scott Carpenter was incredibly profound. The experience that I had in Clem too. And of course, the Alaskan one, the other aspect of that is with the Alaskan one, I have a connection there who is familiar with that area and who has a extremely remote river section area where no one ever goes except for mining research or logging research. The stories there are incredible. And he's let me know when you want to go there and I'll get you in there. And it's really not that far from where I was. So perhaps even a greater hotspot. I will say though that it's a fool's game to try to go back and relive or make happen in the something in the same place, even at the same time, because if these beings do exist, I'm sure they're not just hanging out in one spot. I saw a lynx one time on a trail in Temagami, and I could go stand by that corner of the trail for the rest of my life and never see another lynx again. So I don't think it's so simple as to say I'm going to go back there because that's where I experienced something. That said, where I did experience the most profound things, and there's about, let's see, there's the Portland one, which was the extra episode. There's on the top of the mountain, Radium Springs. These are places, am I intrigued and interested in going back? Absolutely. I think what I'll do is just simply, rather than trying to guess at when I think they're going to be there, is I would base it on whether, when can I go there and not freeze or be rained on constantly or whatever. And so it makes it logistically possible. But yeah, definitely. I'm excited about going back for sure. And then you had a second part to that question.
My good buddy Roger up in Tennessee asked this question. You already answered the second part, but I'll put it out there in its totality. How do you choose your areas for research? And are you going to go back to well-known places or lesser-known places for the new documentary?
I think you have listeners that I believe, I hope, happy with my answer to that. You can't choose. We can call them hotspots all you want. Sure, I can tell you when the lake trout are going to be biting in Temagami, Ontario, but picking and choosing where I'm going to go to elicit an encounter is a fool's game. It's because it's their choice, not mine, if you will. And I think it's more about, recently I was doing, it's up right now on my YouTube channel, I did a director's commentary on one of the last episodes that I did in the Radium Springs area, and commented a lot about relaxing and also making yourself very vulnerable. Now, as a survival instructor, it's tricky because making yourself vulnerable is dangerous. You never do that. So going in and staying in a place where I'm vulnerable to, I'm the one who can be seen, but I can't see much around me. For example, if I'm up on a ledge looking over, seeing everything, I'm not so vulnerable. That's why moose hang out on ledges looking for wolves. You know, I'm down in the deep in a gully like this. I'm now very vulnerable walking down that gully. But in this situation, I believe that's part of the process, is placing yourself in an area where you are vulnerable to allow this species to know you're there without you knowing they're watching you. And again, how far do we go with this? Because if we're on this side of the scale, then their ability to travel and get to places becomes much more complex. So in the end, all I am is a human making himself vulnerable. In the hotspots, sure. I'd be stupid to try this in Central Park, New York. But I would definitely want to go. And one of those hotspots, there's a place east of Portland, there's in northwestern Canada, there's the top of the mountain area, Radium Springs area. There's my own cabin in Temagami, Ontario. There's Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. Funnily enough, where I didn't really have much of anything was actually in Willow Creek, right? You'd think, yeah, that's the scene of the film, right? The Patterson, that's where I didn't have, that was the least of what I had was when I was down in Willow Creek. The least of any, and I would say nothing happened. But yet then I go to my own cottage in Temagami, Ontario, and this happens and that happens and this happens. You're at a bit of a loss, and you're hard pressed to say, I'm going there and I can elicit a response. Now, notwithstanding people who say they have relationships and always go, I always have, no, I don't always. I've been able to have experiences in lots of places because I think it's about how I present myself.
I'm going to go a little off script here as far as some of the questions with the listeners and ask my own question here, because this is something that has come up for me so many times over the course of, I've probably interviewed 1,000 people at this point. We're over 500 episodes of the show. And the thing that comes up over and over that really baffles me is some of these habituation situations that people claim to have. Are you going to explore some of that in this new film and maybe look at some of these habituation situations where people are claiming to have multiple experiences over the course of time with these creatures on their property?
Yes and no. This one comes with a cautionary tale. One thing I'm not going to do is give you yet another film with 17 eyewitness interviews. We had lots of those. Too many. Finding Bigfoot, the only thing that was good about Finding Bigfoot was the town hall. Story after story. That was the fun part. That was the good part. You don't need me interviewing yet another guy who's got a hunt camp he goes to. Those are already out there. I need me to answer these questions. That's what the question of Bigfoot is about. Let's answer these questions. You can hear lots of great stories. Will there be some potentially peppered throughout the film? That comes down to filmmaking. If this is the right time to let Jeff from Texas tell his story, or anybody else tell their story that I have on camera, sure. One of the things I haven't told you is what I want to do is go to a lot of the people who are spending all of their time actually researching and going out there and going after this. I hope I get a chance to sit down with David Politis, very good friend of mine, and I respect him a lot. Jeff Meldrum, Stacy Brown Jr. These are individuals that are either acquaintances or downright friends and have real experiences, but I don't want to get caught down that trap where I just start giving you a parade of people who know what they saw and they don't care what anybody says. They got their story to tell. We've got those stories. We've got lots of them. That's the other thing I'd love to say to people for this film. So, along with not getting all of that, it's not just going to be another film where it's going to be that followed by a creepy aerial shot over a misty forest that's turned into black and white, followed by another story. That's not what I do. It's not how I approach this. So hope that makes sense, if you know what I mean. Did I answer the question?
No, that was really the perfect answer, at least for me, because I am so craving that, because that's one of the things. I host another show. I host multiple podcasts, obviously, with my co-host Wayne over on That Bigfoot Podcast. And we've had conversation after conversation about this. We literally did a show recently where if you go and Google the latest thing in Bigfoot or the newest thing in Bigfoot, there's really nothing out there. I think Sasquatch Sunset was probably the only thing that's even recent from this year that pops up. And I had those guys on the show. I interviewed the creators and directors and stars of that show a couple of months back when the film came out. And I have my opinions about it. It's not my favorite thing that happened in 2024, but that's really what's happening in Bigfoot. And I think this film, your film, The Question of Bigfoot, can change all of that for so many people, because we are hungry. We are craving the next best thing. And we want these answers to these age-old questions that we've all been wanting to know.
Can I interrupt you, Brian, and just say it? And back to the why of why I got in. I did the Survivorman Bigfoot series because I felt Finding Bigfoot did such a disservice to the phenomenon. Notwithstanding that I love Cliff. I think Cliff's a really great guy, a really nice man. But I think that show, which was not in his control, was a joke. I'm back now because of what you just said. I'm like, you know what? Now's the right time. Now's the right time to do this up correctly. There are some other films on the horizon, some I can't speak of, and people I respect like Doug Hychek, but notwithstanding the directions they might go, I have a direction that I go that is a different perspective from just about everybody. It's the right time.
So this question comes from my friend Chris up in Tennessee, and she wants to know, this is something we've done entire shows about this as well. It's something that I have been preaching for so long because there's so many people doing independent research. I do my own research. I went out with Todd last year in October. I went up for a week with Todd out in Radium. I've been out in the UK looking for these things. I was out in the Pacific Northwest a couple of months ago. That's where I had my experiences. But there's so many people doing independent research. And Chris wants to know your perspective, your opinion on this, Les. How do we as a Bigfoot community come together and share the information that brings us together and proves the existence of these creatures? Hopefully films like this, incorporating so many different people with so many different perspectives, will hopefully help do this for us in the community. But it is one of those things that's very divided. It is, this is mine. You can't come here. You can't come to my research area. You can't know what I'm doing because it's mine. How, in your opinion, can we bring the community together and move forward in a way that we share information and hopefully brings us a little bit closer to answering some of these questions that we have about Bigfoot?
Can I be a little brash?
Abso-freaking-lutely.
Let's just ignore and stay away from the crazies. When I say that, with all due respect to your listeners, it's a small percentage. In a room of 100 people at a Bigfoot conference, it's 2 people, maybe 3, probably 2, who are obsessive about this and obsessive about that. Nobody, not over here on the side of portals and aliens or over here on Jeff Meldrum's side of Gigantopithecus, nobody can claim knowing. The best we have is believing someone who said they've actually seen it. But to answer this person's question is, see, for me, okay, I'll answer it this way. When I was doing Survivorman Bigfoot, I got into it with eyes wide open and innocent. And this is so cool. I'm looking for this big ape, but I think maybe it could be out there. When I discovered that individuals would want me to be their poster boy, they would want me to be in their camp of what this is. And I don't know if I made enemies or not, but I definitely refuse to be anybody's poster boy. I am wide open. I'm wide open to all possibilities in life anyway. So for me to avoid, for example, the subject of their supposed ability within the scope of telepathy, that brings a whole other thing into it. Again, with massive amounts of respect to Jeff Meldrum, who's approaching it on a purely scientific basis, he doesn't want to talk about that. Unless he one day decides to get interested in that. And I respect that. But for a moment, I'm into that. I want to talk to who's in that world. But if anybody in any of the worlds is like slamming the desk, and this is what I mean by avoiding the crazies. I see it on on Facebook postings. I'll get, Les Stroud needs to contact me urgently. Only I can give him a connection to these people. I have a relationship. And I'm just like, you're the first person that's never going to get a call back from my office. I want sanity. I want critical thinkers. So avoid those who are not critical thinkers, who aren't willing to go, honestly, I got no time for the portal thing or the alien thing, but I think there's a lot of knowledge and information behind why this could be Gigantopithecus, why it could be highly intelligent, why it could evade trail cams and exist in the forest. I'm not interested in them vanishing before your eyes, but I'm over here. Those are the people, like a Jeff Meldrum or like a David Paulides, or even my good buddy Stacy Brown Jr., who comes with a lot of color. For some reason, we're brothers from other mothers. I don't know why, because we're like diametrically opposed in so many ways. That's how you avoid the crazies and you stick with the critical thinkers. And when you smell the crazy, I'm going to go over to this other booth here, over here. I'm going to go talk to Ron Moorhead, and get away from the crazies. I don't know if that's too simplistic of an answer, but that's how I'm going to do it.
All right, here's another question. I am a musician. I have done music my entire life. I love your music. This question is about your music. They want to know a little bit about your music career. And do you think Sasquatches may react or interact with music and the melodic type of vocalizations and whistles that they are reported to do? I'm throwing this in there. It's not a part of this question, but I want to know if you're maybe looking at possibly doing some of that music-related stuff in this new project to see if they respond to it.
First of all, thanks for asking about the music. Quick tidy up on that is I performed on Slash's new album, his blues album called Orgy of the Damned, and I did some touring with him. Great blues rock album. And I'm always working on my Mother Earth album to get live performances happening, which is a celebration of nature through film and music. And I have 2 new albums coming out, actually. One is in that Americana acoustic genre that I love so much, and the other one is full on rock, being produced by Mike Klink, which is a Grammy Award-winning producer. So yes, my music constant. In fact, if anything, you know what I'm doing right now? I'm doing music and A Question of Bigfoot. Those are my 2 worlds right now. Wild Harvest will come along when it comes along, that series, but these are my 2 worlds right now. That is one thing that I did not do, but I have seen, pardon this cliche, music soothe the savage beast. I've seen that with animals. I'm a musician. I've done it myself, actually, with harmonica. I was able to bring in an audience from across the other side of the lake, upwards of 50 loons. That's a water bird with a beautiful call. I brought 50 of them with my harmonica. I got wolves to howl with my harmonica. Short answer now is absolutely. We're going to see where that can go.
This comes from my buddy Jake out west. He wants to know your thoughts on migration. This is something that's come up so many times. I finished my first book, Sasquatch Unleashed, The Truth Behind the Legend, that came out earlier this year. Cliff actually wrote the foreword to my book. It's a very scientific approach to Bigfoot, so we didn't really get a ton into migration because it's very subjective, but that's one of the things I've had conversations with people like Jeff and Cliff about. Jake wants to know your opinions on whether these things migrate, and do you think there's a large enough population in the lower 48 and even in Canada that could support the species? Or do you think these things are in smaller groups and they're migrating based on climate, food, and other factors?
So based on my knowledge of natural history and the wilderness, in short, here's what I think. I think they've got to number somewhere between 30 and 45,000 across North America. I think they are in small groups. And I absolutely think they migrate, if not great distances, at least moderate distances like a herd of elk might, based on weather patterns and where they might exist and sleep, their prey, whether that's berries or elk or everything in between, fish, salmon, and so on. I think they have homelands, but I think generally speaking, why? Because you have to name any hunter-gatherer society that didn't migrate. There isn't one. They all had to migrate. Right now is when the camas is ready. Right now the berries are ready. The salmon is running over here. I follow the elk this way over there. They're most vulnerable in this moment, this time of the year. Just on a purely physical level alone, that's the way I see it. I can't say that's the way it is, but that's the way I believe it. It probably is.
Another purely subjective question here. This is something that's come up recently. I've had conversations with a couple of people. I'm actually trying to get a couple of folks scheduled for an interview on the show to talk about this because they've claimed to have seen this. I've talked to Fred Roll up in Alaska a couple of times, and Fred has interviewed folks who have claimed to have seen this as well. It's about the tree knocks that so many people have recorded. You mentioned finding Bigfoot earlier. It was something that they did constantly. It's something that a lot of researchers still do. I was out in the woods with Bobo a couple of months ago, and that was happening. He brought a tree knocker, and we were doing tree knocks. Do you think it's possible that these tree knocks that people are hearing are more of mouth pops versus tree knocks? So vocalizations as opposed to these things picking up a stick and hitting a tree.
I did hear one perspective that I thought had some validity to it, that they are potentially mouth pops and not tree knocks. And if you think about, first of all, a head that's going to be 2 to 3 times larger than mine, they have a mouth cavity that's just massive. And knowing when and how and where to do that, you could have a very loud sounding pop with that. For us, 100 yards, 500 yards, a quarter mile away. One of the reasons that I like going down that road is because I suppose in their world, they would know where the trees are. Me trying to find trees to make that sound, it's hard. I can't just be near any old swamp and find the right club and the right tree to hit it, and it makes that sound. Try it. Go ahead and try it. You'll be hard-pressed to find something within hours that actually sounds like that. And now it has to be in the right place at the right time and create the right echo space. All of that, trying to bring all of that together, that's not so easy. And the different types of trees we have, if we're down here in Oregon, we have pine and madrone trees. But if I'm up in Ontario, I'm dealing with birch and poplar. It's also different. So if they can mouth pop, why would they do that? That's just is the problem for the skeptics and anybody out there who doesn't care about this. Is it seems silly, doesn't? Oh yeah, I'm a Bigfoot. The thing is, it's just going to be some form of rudimentary communication going on. Maybe they have advanced communication. I'm not going to go there right now, but I will say that in terms of rudimentary communication, why not? Claps, whistles, pops, vocalizations, imitations. Of course, therein lies the danger of being led down the garden pathway of every time you hear a crow, it's a Sasquatch. Every time you hear an owl, it's a Sasquatch. And then I've even done this. No, that's an owl. They imitate owls. Oh, good Lord. So it's tricky, but anyway, I hope that answers your questions. I am intrigued by this way of communicating that, as I say, a quarter kilometer away, echoed across the lake from a large jowled communicative creature. It certainly makes sense.
Yeah, I had Tom Powell on the show recently, and Tom was showing me his technique of how he makes the mouth pops. It is really loud if you get proficient at it. I can certainly see something with baseball mitt-sized hands with this, like you said, an enormous jowl. I can definitely see it being something that's more of a vocalization versus them finding a stick or a rock to hit a tree with. Here's an interesting question that comes from Tom. With all of your wilderness experience and now the experiences that you've had that you believe may be related to Sasquatch, are there different precautions that you take before you go out into the wilderness that maybe you didn't take before because of the presence of these creatures?
Zero. I take no precautions that way. The only precautions I take would be bear spray in grizzly territory, a rifle in polar bear territory, get back in the cage and if I'm diving with great white sharks, keep my eyes straight on a tiger, and staying away from lions. That's my precautions. Otherwise, no, I don't want to come across as braggadocio with it or anything, but I'm not cautious in the forest. And I think that goes against the experience you're trying to have. You go out there with a AK-47 ready to shoot down this big beast. Good luck with that. I'd rather be vulnerable and trust that it's not my time to die yet.
Here's an interesting question that's come up multiple times. As I said, I wrote my first book. It was a very scientific book, but I've just finished my second book, and it is a fictionalized story about Bigfoot to answer some of these questions, in my opinion, about how they might be answered. This is one of the things that I addressed in the book, and some people have asked me this over and over. I've talked to one person who interviewed a person who has since passed away years ago, who had an experience with a juvenile Sasquatch that he grew up getting to know, according to him. And he said that this Bigfoot was able to make fire. Here's one of the questions that somebody asked on Reddit was, in your opinion, do you believe they have the ability to use or make fire? And do you believe that they might use cave systems and or hibernate during the wintertime in some of these harsher climates?
The fire thing is out of my scope of even trying to deal with, simply because my initial answer is in the negative for that one. It doesn't make sense to me. Maybe on the odd occasion there's one rare, but it would make him very vulnerable to being seen and discovered by us. For those of researchers who find tracks and questionable tree structures and so on, you'd start to find fire spots. And then they could say, oh yeah, but that could just be humans leaving fire behind. I don't think so. And then again, we go back to the question of where they live and hibernating and so on. If we're going to stay in that realm, it's purely a matter of biology. Let's take my chocolate labs. My chocolate labs can jump in icy water and enjoy it and come out like nothing's happened. I don't know how they do it, but they can do it. So a species like Sasquatch that is so at home in the wilderness, whether or not they hibernate, I could see that being a reality for them up in Canada and northern Canada. But if we're going to allow that there's many of them and they're across North America, do they need to hibernate? If it's a Florida skunk ape, do they need to hibernate in Oregon? No. And the other truism with hibernation is that it's not what people think it is. It's not like a bear goes off to sleep and never wakes up in the middle of winter or even never comes out of its den. Black bears will come out of their den in January and February if they just feel the urge to get up and stretch. It's a thing. Grizzlies too, polar bears too. I don't think people should be imaging a family of a dozen Sasquatch huddled together in a cave hibernating out the winter. I think that's fanciful thinking. There'd be much more to it than that. The whole physiology of a black bear is built towards being able to sleep for months on end in that state of hibernation, living off fat reserves. How do we know that Sasquatch can do the same? Or are they more like us and they can't? No, we can't eat 6 months worth of food and then sleep for 6 months. And a black bear is a canine, whole different trajectory of evolution. As far as utilizing cave systems, and so all of that is just a big fat yes. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they use cave systems, underground tunnels? There's so much more of that out there than we know. I've found some, not saying I found Bigfoot cave, but I've found caves that nobody knew about because I was bushwhacking. There's so much of that out there. There's a few million into the ground caves in North America. I'm not saying that because I know that scientifically. I'm guessing that's probably the case. So the answer is, why wouldn't they? I would.
Definitely agree. Last couple of questions before we completely shift gears, before I let you get out of here. And this has come up recently. I had a great listener who was into stats that was over from the UK, and we had an entire show where he broke down some of the stuff that was on the BFRO. He looked through 5,000 encounters and broke down the specific time of the year that you're more likely to have an experience with Bigfoot. So this is a quick two-part question for you. How long do you typically stay in an area that you're researching specifically for the documentary and or just in general when it comes to Bigfoot? And is there a specific time of year that you prefer to do that kind of study and look for these things when you're out in the woods?
I don't believe that if you stay out there a month, you aren't going to have any activity, because most of my activities happened within hours. Now, I could get into the details as to why I believe that's the case with me. I don't have anything special. but that most of it, in some cases, literally arriving on the spot and something goes down. I certainly don't need to prove myself with my ability being able to stay out somewhere for a long time. I don't think that in this case, in this research, that I need that. Conversely speaking, if you're being a researcher, I think it should be constant and consistent nonetheless. The problem with that is you can spend months with nothing and it becomes very disheartening. So it'll come down to your methodology. And I'm sorry, Brian, what was the second question?
Yeah, the second part was just, is there a specific time of year that you prefer to go out, that you've had more experiences? For example, the gentleman that we had on from the UK, when he broke down the BFRO, he found that basically October, November, and December were the three biggest months for a potential Sasquatch encounter. Have you seen that in your own research? Is there a specific time of month where you've had more experiences where you would maybe focus on being out in the woods looking for them?
It's an interesting question because part of the problem, I'd love to know how that data was acquired, what the cross sections were, because, for example, that also just happens to be the time when most hunters are out in the woods. You won't find me lollygagging around the forest looking for a Sasquatch encounter in the middle of June in Northern Ontario, Canada. No thanks. Because the counter I will have will be a beast that is monstrous, that is made up of black flies that are going to pick me up and carry me away, or mosquitoes. There's another species. Is that even a problem to them? We know black flies send moose out of the forest going crazy. Is that a problem for Sasquatch? I don't know. Frigidness of winter is just brutal and painful and cold. So you don't find us out there. You find most of us humans lollygagging around out in the woods, trekking out in the woods in that fall season. Maybe August. You could throw August and September in there for basic general hikers, but everybody who hunts, that's when we go. It's the most pleasant. It's the easiest. The bugs are gone. Temperatures are good. So it could be just a subject of that. That said, I've seen other researchers with their footage from the winter. Think about it. If you're ever going to see tracks, when I used to do nothing but tracking regular animals, winter was my favorite time of year. Because trying to find that one patch of mud where a grizzly happened to walk in that one patch of mud where I can cast his track, that's tough. But once you get into snow, hit at the right time, all the tracks are there for you. I would love to know and hear from people who spend more time in the winter. Do they have better luck? Me, myself, I had one of my more significant experiences in early spring. Very significant. So did the person I was out with. There's a whole story behind when I took the fan out in a Survivorman episode that he and I have, Joseph McCall and I have, that is based on Bigfoot, which I didn't share in the Survivorman film. That was April. I'll finish this. I wouldn't curtail my research based on the time of year. I would go when I could go. Because also, April in Oregon is freaking beautiful. What a great time of year to go out, right? All depends on where you are. Florida, who cares what time of year you go in Florida?
I've got to ask you about this. You and I talked about it. I sent you a couple of screenshots before we got on this morning, and I want to get into this video from Survivorman Romania Part 1 in the Transylvanian Alps. This is something that came up on the radar probably 5 or 6 months ago. Wayne and I talked about it on that Bigfoot podcast. Are you aware of this possible Sasquatch that you might have filmed over your shoulder while you were doing this? Tell us the scoop. What do you got to say about that?
Yeah, let's do it by talking about the other ones. No, we didn't see anything. Then we'd see on social media, hey man, something ran across the road when you were there and something's in the woods behind it. These are other shows, other episodes, other sightings. And we were intrigued by this because I would say to Barry or Luke or whoever was working on it, I'd say, pull up the original footage. We won't get a clearer vantage of what that is without the original footage. Because what people make the mistake, if you're not into film production, what they're not aware of is that the footage, when it finally gets to your television screen, has been compressed 2-3 times throughout the process. Color grading and all these different things go on. And even though it looks clean and clear and nice, the reality is it's not as clean and clear as the actual tape or the card that the original clip is on. There's all this compression that happens. With compressions comes what we call artifacts. And artifacts are things that you think are there that you look at the original, it's not even there. So we started looking at these, Barry and I, and we were pulling them up. And every time it was like, yeah, it's a leaf in the foreground. Okay. It's a branch in the wind. Okay. We could see that clearly it was not a Sasquatch running across the road. It was the movement of a shadow from the wind and the tree, just really clear. That said, we've answered all of those except this one. This one, we did not know about it. And it is new. Within the scope of this film, we're going to be approaching that one. There's a few things to take into account here. Number one, it's in the Transylvanian Alps in Romania. What other stories come from that region? Any at all? Would this be the only story that would ever come from that region? Or are there hundreds? That'll change our thought on it. They're already like, oh yeah, no, are you kidding? In the Transylvanian Alps, man, it's just like Karjesh Mountains, I think it's called. There's all kinds of sightings. Okay, that might change how we look at it. We're going to pull up that footage. What I can say is it was not answered by being a leaf or a branch or an artifact or anything like that at all. Yeah, I also want to approach that whole one, and only because I think it's the only one where my editor and I are looking at it going, what the hell? All of the other ones, it's a leaf. So yes, I'm quite confident it'll make it into the film.
Awesome. Let's close out there. Let's talk about the documentary. The last question really is leading into that. It comes from my buddy over at Bigfoot Society. Jeremiah wants to know, will this be in theaters? Is it going to be on streaming platforms? What else can you possibly tell us about the documentary, when we can expect it?
If I can do an isolated run in theaters where I think I'll actually get some people out to it, or perhaps screening it at a Bigfoot conference. I've long been asked to join a lot of the different Bigfoot conferences and been unable to. They're good people. I just haven't been able to do it. So I think that would probably be very appropriate. Say, go to the Ohio Bigfoot concert or something like that, or the one in Washington. We're going to screen the film and I'll be there. That would make a lot of sense. On the network television side of it, they're hard pressed to take stuff like this. It's a battleground trying to get your stuff on these places. Maybe Netflix, maybe they drank the reality TV Kool-Aid years ago, and that's all they really want. So if this isn't got that reality sensationalism to it, if it with some earnestness, they don't want it. I'd be left to streaming, of course, which in that case opens me up to Prime, to my distribution company who could distribute it around the world, because there is the odd network that will take it. And of course, YouTube.
There you have it, folks. The Question of Bigfoot, Les Stroud. I will link to everything that Les talked about in the show notes today, specifically the Kickstarter, folks. These things do not make themselves. It is an expensive venture to get into good filmmaking. To do what Les does, he cannot do it without you guys. Make sure you click the button right here in the show notes. Go over to Kickstarter right now. Give whatever you can. If it's $1, if it's $10,000, it is going to help us answer these questions. And Les Stroud, in my opinion, is the man. Les, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share everything with us today. We are so looking forward to this, and I can't thank you enough for your time, man.
Absolutely, Brian. And certainly, let's get me right back on with you when I have that film to present. We'll get into it and be happy to dissect it with you, and we'll have some fun again. It's a joy talking with you.